My guest this week
on Conflict Zone
is Alexander Downer,
Michael O'Flaherty,
Ramush Haradinai, Chris Fern, Ibrahim Gandour,
Taravza Kavakshakan,
Mikhail Saakashvili, Ibrahim Qureshi, Kemes Jinawi,
Ivana Klimpush Sensatse,
Nick Mangwana, Mark Regev, Ehud Barak, Nabil Shath, Zoltan Kovac,
Martin Kobler,
Taher El Soni, Alfonso Dastis. Then it's a cover-up, isn't it?
No, I don't think. No, I mean everyone was carrying cameras, and things can be seen and are being seen and investigated. I don't think there is any cover-up.
No?
No?
Well, you continue to deny excessive force. Human Rights Watch, for example, said from its own research into 3 cases, it had no doubt at all that national police and civil guard officers used excessive force.
Well,
you think they made that up?
You're talking about 3 cases and 4 people taken to hospital.
At least three areas that they covered. I mean, in Fonolosa, for instance, an old woman, 70 years old, said she was picked up and thrown to the ground by 2 civil guards after refusing to move from her chair, which was blocking the path to the station. Someone else was then thrown on top of her, and her wrist broke. Is that not excessive force?
I don't know. I mean, if they were prevented from, if they prevented the police from doing what they should be doing because
people get thrown on top of each other, a 70-year-old woman.
Come on. These kinds of accidents occur. So
doesn't sound like an accident, does it?
Well, look, I don't think this was by any means a really, a bloody Sunday or anything like that.
Well, it may not have been Bloody Sunday, but it was hardly in the best traditions of policing, was it? If people are being thrown onto the ground.
Well, if you look at the actions of the police in many other incidents, I don't think you will be many different situations and pictures than those that you saw. So I don't think, and I repeat, I don't think that was excessive force, no.
You are in charge of human rights for your party. Let's talk about them. President Erdogan said 2 days after the operation started, those who make the mistake and take the public squares will pay a heavy price. We will crush those who oppose us in this national struggle. Crush your own population?
What he meant, what this statement means is there's no toleration for supports for terrorism.
Crush your own population? According to the Turkish government, more than 300 people have already been detained for criticizing the operation on social media. There is no place for dissenting voices in Erdogan's Turkey?
Of course not. That's not the case. You know that's not the case. But supporting terrorism is not acceptable anywhere in the world. I know that's the case in the United States. It was the case right after September 11th attacks, which I know because I was there during those days. So that is not acceptable anywhere.
The Israeli writer Amos Oz says that Israelis were condemned to rule over people who didn't want to be ruled by you. You condemned yourself to that, didn't you?
I don't believe we condemned. The present government and previous government for 50 years ended up ruling over other people, and that, at least in the long run, should be corrected, and we're supposed to do it not just because of the moral issue of our neighbors, but basically stemming out of our own needs, identity, security, and future.
Yeah, but you were warned, as Abba Eban said in 1967, your foreign minister at the time. He called it a barrel of dynamite. And he said, we're sitting here with 2 populations, one of them endowed with all the civil rights and the other denied all rights. This is a picture of 2 classes of citizens that's hard to defend, even in the special context of Jewish history. What he was suggesting was that it was immoral, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the
whole occupation has been immoral and unfair.
You know, Tim, the same Abba Eban said that Israel can never allow to come back to the borders of 67, which he called Auschwitz kind of borders. I don't believe in either. We shouldn't go to extremism.
A lot of Palestinians quoted in the media look back at the 67 war and describe the years since then as a half-century of humiliation. But a lot of it was self-humiliation, wasn't it? Palestinian disunity, human rights abuses, corruption, violence. You're going to tell me it's all Israel's fault, but it wasn't, was it?
When you can't really hit the murderer, you put the blame on the murdered. That's typical.
You have to take some responsibility for the violence, the corruption, the human rights abuses inside the Palestinian territories, don't you?
Because there are problems. We are human, and even when we are under occupation, even when we are with so many agonies caused by that occupation, we have our own mistakes. But the major problem is there.
But the Palestinian people lay them at your door. We have the latest Palestinian polls. Blame for the leadership. Only 25% said the leadership is doing its best. 41% said its role was inadequate, and 32% called it negligent. So it's time for you to go, isn't it?
I think this is much better than I thought.
Really?
Yeah, of course.
You pleased by these results?
Not pleased at all.
41% say you're inadequate.
It is normal. When you fail to get that settler occupation off your chest, when you fail to free your people.
Let's look at the city of Jerusalem. Under Israeli rule, it's become a place of division and poverty, predominantly for the Arab sector in East Jerusalem, the part you occupied in 67 and then annexed. According to last year's poverty report of the National Insurance Institute, 3/4 of the residents of East Jerusalem and 83.4% of the children live below the poverty line. That's more than 50% higher than the equivalent poverty rates in the rest of Israel. Why did you let it get so bad?
I think the most important thing to remember is that since Israel unified the city in 1967, for the first time in the history of the city, all communities have religious freedom, all the religious sites of all the faiths are protected, and that each religious community autonomously administers its own religious site. So the Christian
We're not talking about the religious sites. I'm talking about why the Palestinians are 50% poorer
we'll get to
than
that
Jewish
in a second.
Israelis.
We'll get to that in a second. But one has to look at the facts. This is a city that's important to millions of people around the planet.
Yeah, so why did you let it sink into
the fact
poverty?
that the religious sites of all faiths are for the first time autonomously administered by their own respective religious communities, and the freedom of worship is enshrined in Israeli law, that is something that I believe Israel deserves credit for.
Why did you let it get so bad? I come back to this question, which you don't want to answer.
No, I'm happy to answer it.
Why did you let it get so bad?
I think actually if you look at the situation in the Arab neighborhoods of the city, you'll see that there are gaps that need to be narrowed. But compare them to Arabs in other parts of the Middle East or even in the Palestinian territories, you see that they are considerably better.
You insult the Americans. You say, damn your money to them. What do you expect they're going to do? Your people are going to suffer as a result of this outburst.
We will
and you're happy with that? You're proud of that?
We will insult anyone who is going to touch our rights. Our rights is not for money. Our dignity is not for money.
So you don't care whether your people suffer as a result of these insults or not,
We are
do you?
suffering since 70 years ago. It's not new for us, and we can live without the American money. We can find a way, but the Palestinian national dignity and rights is not for sale, it's not for money. Because of that, we start our resistance to try to find a peaceful solution to end the occupation and to end the suffering for Palestinian refugees and the Palestinians inside West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza.
As Amnesty International put it, since 2011, the overwhelming majority of credible allegations of torture and other serious violations by security forces have not been independently and impartially investigated. Is that the sort of country that you want to preside over?
This is not the
well, you think they sit around making this stuff up?
Most
they don't.
Most of the Tunisian people, most of the political families in Tunisia, this is not the kind of country they want. They wanted a full-fledged democratic country. We are proud of the achievement we have already made. We are not yet a democracy, to be honest. We are not yet a democracy. We never pretended that we are full, we finished.
But you've made promises.
We are on the path of reaching a democratic system where transparency, the rule of law, 100% will be respected.
But whatever line you toe, you know full well that Mr. Mnangagwa is hostage to the brutality, the brutal record of ZANU-PF.
He's not.
His period as head of Central Intelligence in the mid-1980s coincided with the most brutal of all Mugabe's massacres, didn't it? So-called Gukura Hundi killings, in which up to 20,000 from the Ndebele tribe were killed or disappeared. He's denied any role, but actually the state-controlled Bulawayo Chronicle reported at the time that he compared dissidents to bugs and cockroaches that had reached such an epidemic that the government needed to bring in DDT to get rid of them.
There are two things.
His words.
Tim,
His words.
Yeah, I heard you. Now give me a chance to respond to you. First thing is, we were in very formative years of our country. Mistakes were made.
And that excuses massacres
no,
of 20,000 people.
It doesn't excuse them. We're not making excuses. I'm simply saying we made mistakes. So that's an admission that we made mistakes. That's number one. Number two, during that period, when he was Minister of State Security, he was coming to Parliament to account for his actions all the time. We had a very robust Parliament at that time.
You didn't make mistakes. You
Yes,
committed crimes. These weren't parking offences for which you go to court and pay a fine. This was murder on a grand scale.
So let's listen to Human Watch and Amnesty International. They say that most of these 18 and other detainees suffered torture or were at least denied medical treatment. That means Ukraine is no better or worse than Russia, for example. I mean, this is existing. This is not an invention. Human Rights, Amnesty International, international organizations are searching on these realities.
Well, then it's very good that they are searching on these realities, and Ukraine has never been hiding any of the problems that we might have. But comparing Ukraine to Russian Federation would be totally wrong, because we do know that, for example, right now more than 140 of our citizens are being kept illegally kept on occupied territories of the east of Ukraine, of Donbass, and they are not being let by Russian Federation and by those puppets on the ground, by those hybrid forces on the ground, to be visited by, for example, International Red Cross organization there, while on the Ukrainian-controlled territory, government-controlled territory, more than 30 visits have been happening over this period of time to those people who have violated the Ukrainian law.
You intercept the refugees and asylum seekers at sea, either tow them back to where they came from or have them processed, mainly on the Pacific island of Nauru or Manus Island, Papua New Guinea. The guiding principle being that people who try to arrive by boat should never, ever set foot in Australia. Is that right?
If you pay a people smuggler and you try to get to Australia that way, and then you can only get to Australia by boat if you do that. If you pay a people smuggler and try to get to Australia that way, we will try to discourage that process. We want to stop it. We do resettle refugees. We're one of very few countries that has a refugee resettlement program. But we don't think it's appropriate for people to pay people smugglers and try and get to Australia.
Don't you? Your government was accused of paying people smugglers itself 2 years ago, handing over wads of cash and telling the people smugglers to take the people back to Indonesia.
Well, try to understand what we are trying to do here. So
you don't deny this.
Well, I'm not sure of the reference, by the way. I'm just the High Commissioner.
Amnesty International accused you of doing this. So they didn't make it up.
I have no idea. But what I can say to you is try to understand what we're trying to do. We have been quite traumatised as a country by seeing scenes on television of boats being wrecked on islands off Australia, in particular Christmas Island off the northwest coast of Australia. And many people drowned. Hundreds and hundreds of people have drowned.
There are huge concerns about your treatment of migrants here in Libya. In February, EU leaders agreed to a controversial plan to stem the flow of migrants from Libya. But we've seen them subject since then to massive abuse. And your Coast Guard actually sometimes shoots at them. I mean, what kind of treatment is this? What kind of humanity is this from Libya?
First of all, you're putting issues that are not necessarily the full facts. I will tell you, for example, when all Europe is talking about fighting or combating illegal migration, where they're coming out of their countries and their ultimate target is to reach Europe, not Libya. We're just a passage. And we're a country of conflict. We're a country divided. We have limited resources. How do you expect us to deal with this flood where even Europe is not able to manage it? If they're not
You're
willing
saying
to
that
accept
because
it,
you don't have sufficient resources, your coast guards are actually
no, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true.
At refugees?
That's not true. That's not true.
Well, this is from the High Commissioner for Human Rights last month, Zaid Rad
Zaid,
al-Hussein.
we met us. He never said that we were shooting.
He said, you have a coast guard that sometimes rescue migrants. This is his exact quote. You have a coast guard that sometimes rescues migrants in distress, but sometimes chooses not to. Like the militias on shore, coast guards also sometimes beat, rob, and even shoot the migrants they intercept. This is a direct quote from him.
Let me tell you the facts.
You saying he knows nothing?
No, I didn't say he knows nothing. I said we don't shoot migrants. What we're doing is trying to apply our sovereign rules and regulations, and by saving their lives and bringing them back. This is an international agreement. This is an EU-Libya agreement.
Let's come back to the refugees. Hundreds of thousands of refugees from Africa are passing through Libya every year on their way to Europe. In their desperation, they are being exploited, used, even enslaved by Libyan militias. What are you and what have you done until now to change this tragic reality?
Well, this is really, if you ask how I feel here, I feel very frustrated. Now, I go to these migration camps once every few weeks, and I see these people suffering, and they tell me their stories, how they lost their families, who were pushed out of away from the trucks, from Eritrea, from Somalia, from other countries, Niger. Now, what are we doing here? There are several things we are doing. First of all, we are improving the situation in the detention centers. These people are in the detention centers of the Libyans. We just make sure that there is enough space to breathe.
No authority, no police, nobody is listening to this government in Libya.
In the case of the migrants, let me prove you wrong, please, and let me severely contradict you. There is a governmental anti-immigration authority which is working. They are working in 23 of the camps. We try to be with them in the camps, financing the camps, and we also submitted clear recommendations to the government what to do in order to make the situation better.
And there are realities. Libya is where 90% of boats crossing the central Mediterranean are launched. The GNA took a deal with the Italian government to stop the ships, but the parliament in Tobruk stuck it down.
Yes, you're right. This is a big human tragedy. And the solution is to work for the implementation of the agreement and to have unified security structures and the restitution of state authority.
In March last year, your Prime Minister spoke condescendingly of flocks of obsessed human rights defenders feeling the overwhelming urge to reprimand us and make allegations against us.
Yeah, that's been the case for the past couple of years, that's right.
You join a club, you sign up to various commitments, they're going to review your progress. That's the point of joining the club. Why complain about it now?
I'm trying to...
Everybody comes under periodic
but
review.
I'm trying to make this discussion into something reasonable. It's our vision of how, say, human rights, how the soft elements of cooperation in the European Union, rule of law, constitutional issues, are based on principle. And
but you don't like being held to account, do you?
No, that's not the case. The thing is that
the
we all know
obsessed
that
human rights defenders. You don't.
We want to avoid.
You're kicking against
we want to avoid,
any kind of review.
We want to avoid that an interpretation is taking over the right sense of the word we have agreed to. And that's what is happening.
This case was dirty through and through, wasn't it?
Mr. Sebastian, look, country I took as a Georgia was a failed country. Way back then. You wouldn't expect me to turn a failed country with no budget, with no functioning institutions that we turned into a very performing, like, brilliant case of success and reforms, but it couldn't have been turned into absolute perfect liberal.
So that was an excuse for preventing justice from being done?
Liberal democracy.
That's an excuse for preventing justice from being done.
English-style judicial system. Our judicial system had been failing. This is true. I would admit it.
The accusation is that you prevented justice from being done.
No, but it's just not true. Our judicial system was weak then, and our judicial system is even worse now.
But your human rights record wasn't that good either during the time you were there, was it?
You would not expect...
Your crackdown on the press, for instance.
Look,
the Imedi TV station that your security forces raided in 2007, physically abusing journalists, destroying their equipment.
But still it went back to the air. So let's
It went out there, but you put your own commissar in power in the station for 5 years.
It still stays there. It hates me. There were plenty of other stations. The main result of my work is in a region where nobody quits on their own. When I had full power, much more than Poroshenko ever would have here, I quit on my own through elections. I gave peaceful transition of power.
As you should have done.
Absolutely.
Your interim national constitution, Bill of Rights, specifically upholds the right to freedom of expression and media.
And
something that has been trashed by your government.
It's been trashed by your government. Whatever contradicts with the constitution is unacceptable. And this is why we are revisiting our laws after the separation of the South to amend them so they can
So you admit there have been abuses against the press?
We have been visiting...
by your government?
Sometimes it happens. I can tell you, I'm not denying that, but it is not something of... that you can
But there's a pattern to this. During demonstrations last month, for instance, the Committee for the Protection of Journalists said 7 reporters had been arrested.
And they were released in 1 week time.
Yes, and it accused you of intimidation, confiscating newspapers. You talk about the number of free newspapers. You confiscated newspapers and you attempted to censor news discrimination.
You can quote me here, I'm against that, and many are against that, and once it happens, some were being compensated.
The fear, though, is that, like every dictatorship, you're scared stiff of the media, aren't you?
We are not a dictatorship. We are not an autocrat. We are an elected government with an elected president and elected parliament.
You're scared stiff that if you have a free press and a critical press, it's going to undermine your hold on power. That's what this is all about, isn't it?
Our press is much more critical to government than you may expect. And you read today's newspapers in Sudan, you will recognize.
And the same criticisms of your government keep coming up year after year: endemic government corruption, lack of accountability for corruption, and intimidation of the media, which is still a big problem here.
I have to come back. I was 12 years in opposition. I am only 100 days in office. I take responsibilities for what I am in charge. We are working on a very transparent way as government. Every activity of our government is transparent. We are fully open and transparent to the media. Everything of our work, it's in access of media.
Nine cases of threats and violence against journalists between January and August last year, including 1 physical attack, 2 cases of intimidation.
I strongly condemn that.
No one has been held responsible.
I strongly condemn that.
No one has ever held responsible.
I strongly condemn that. I am in office from September last year. Only mid-September last year I started this job. Our relations with media are respectful. Our media are young media as well. They have a lot to learn, as we do.
Just half an hour before Daphne Caruana Galizia walked out of her house and got into her car for the last time, she wrote in her blog, "There are crooks everywhere you look now. Yes. The situation is desperate."
Absolutely.
And her murder proved it, didn't it? That's the unpalatable truth.
No, I don't think she was referring to the criminal gang that, well, I don't know what she was referring to be honest with you, but what she'd been talking about and writing about for the last 2 months before her brutal murder was the situation with the new leader of the opposition. The new leader of the opposition, Adrian Delia, had been criticized very ferociously by Caruana Galizia over the last 2 months.
She criticized everybody. She criticized your government.
Absolutely, yes. And she has a right to do that.
Didn't single out the opposition.
Well, no, she didn't. You're right. She criticized practically everybody on the island, as she had the right to do. And people who felt aggrieved had the right to take her to court,
so
as you would do in a normal country. No, absolutely not.
No?
No, you're saying that...
She took on you,
no,
the politicians,
that,
didn't she?
No, you're saying that what she wrote was connected to the murder. I'm saying it's not necessarily the case.
How do you
you're
know
saying
that?
You're saying that. But you're saying that it wasn't. I'm saying it's not necessarily the case. We'll have to wait and see what
But
the
you
court
were her
says.
targets along with business.
Absolutely, yes.
Business leaders.
And,
You were
and
her
when
targets.
people felt that they were aggrieved, they took her to court, as you would do in a normal country where the rule of law is king. And the rule of law in Malta.
And one of your
and so on.
number decided it had to stop.
No,
Someone on this island
That is
decided it
This
had
is
to
a very
stop.
unfair allegation, and I'm surprised that you're doing this.
Do you understand the problem? You are bringing information to countries which you are criticizing. And you demand that these countries will react. But they don't want to react. They are very happy as they are.
I'm not going to give Europe a clean bill of health. The problems are serious, the issues are grave, but I do see small chinks of light. I see small improvements. I gave an example of better oversight of intelligence services. Here we're having valuable conversations with governments about how to put in independent oversight. That's achievement. I've seen refugees, children, locked in cages when I first went to the hotspots in Greece a couple of years ago. They're not in cages anymore. That's an improvement.